there. And I just want to say something about this other view, right? So there were three views. The conventional view in the Divine Principle book, the view that we just talked about, which is centering on the restoration of the three rights.
Stages.
And then this is the 8 vertical stages and the path of Abel. So Father also shared a lot about the restoration was from this point of view, and probably this is very internal type of perspective on how things need to be restored, and about Father's own understanding of his own course as well. And it's about the path of Abel, and it's to go into more depth in a sense. We explained that God comes and he talks to Abel and says to Abel, actually you don't really belong to this household. You don't belong to these parents. Actually, I'm your parent. And that's what God did for us. He spoke to our original nature, which is, before the age of 14, or, not in the literal sense, but in the literal sense of how the fall took place, our original nature. And we knew we belonged to God, not belonged to Satan. But then, of course, God said to Abel, no, go back. You have to go back into the place that you promised you'd never go back to again. And you have to leave my house. And you have to go into that place. And when you arrive in that place, how will you be treated in that place? You will not be welcomed to the door. You will not be received in Satan's household well. You will find it very difficult. So Father expressed that Abel has to risk his life 3 times in order to win Cain, or in order to convince Cain, or in order to be able to win the respect of Cain, the affection of Cain, the willingness of Cain to follow him back into his father's house. So this is also connected to that content and the course. So when Father shared with us, for example, about the home church providence, in that providence of witnessing, and he asked us to go into a home church area, an area of 360 homes representing what? Representing all humanity, representing the whole world. Then when we went there and we testified and we sought to touch people's hearts and lives, he expressed you can expect to be treated like a servant of servants. So it means, for example, you can expect not even to be able to serve. So you visit people and you say, please, I'd like to love you, I'd like to do something for you, and people don't even let you serve them. They close the door in your face and they send you away, and they don't want to. They're afraid of you almost. Strange type of phenomena. But then somebody will allow you to be their servant and allow you to tidy up their garden or carry in their shopping or do something for them. And then as you become their servant, then they'll start to feel differently towards you, and then they'll start to relate to you almost like an adopted son or daughter. And then lo and behold, over time and through your heart and your love, they'll start to feel, hey, this is a better son or daughter than my son or daughter. And then you'll become, you'll move from adopted son or daughter becoming like illegitimate. It's like you aren't actually their son or daughter, but somehow you're, close to their heart, very close to their heart, the child of their love or something, like that. And then how can you recover even this true son's type of position to be acknowledged by them? Maybe illegitimate one is the one you don't acknowledge, right? You're very close to them, but you don't tell the world about your illegitimate children, right? Well, hopefully we don't have any, but Mr. Mitterrand had an illegitimate. I'm not telling the world about it, but this type of background or circumstances, and then I suppose the true son is the one that can be acknowledged in front of everybody, that will be testified to, something like that maybe. But then through that sort of very internal course, ultimately, what are you trying to recover? You're trying to set a condition, which is to do also with the restoration of the sonship. Right? That's what it means. Servant of servant to true son, it means you're acknowledged. You're acknowledged as the righteous one. You're acknowledged as the righteous one that everybody wants to follow. Or you're making the condition like the foundation to receive the Messiah. And then you're the John the Baptist. So who's John the Baptist? John the Baptist is a very acknowledged person, right? Because it describes about him that even from the day of his birth, everybody, when he was born, and Zechariah wrote, his name is John, because he couldn't speak it, and then his mouth was opened, right? and he testified. And it said the news of what occurred spread through the whole hill country of Judea, and people questioned in their hearts, what is the meaning of this? It means the Lord is close at hand, the Lord is coming. So that even from his birth, that sort of situation was there. And then, of course, he becomes a very powerful figure. Of course, he's not an establishment figure. He's out in the wilderness, but actually still people respect him so much that they ask him, are you the one? Are you the one, or should we wait for another? Are you the Messiah? Because he's such a powerful preacher and spiritual leader. So anyhow, somehow you can understand he's making the foundation for the restoration of elder sonship, right? That's something he's got to do. And then of course he should pass that to Jesus. The baptism, the voice from God, the dove descending on the head, he's showing that Jesus is the Messiah. And he should pass all that foundation to declare that Adam has come. And Eve, who's Eve? Well, some level Eve is the mother that Jesus is born from, Mary. Another level, of course, there's also the bride that's being prepared. And of course, John had a very big part to do with that as well. So you can understand this type of content in the contents of our lives. And Father explains basically this is the course back to restore elder sonship, then to restore the mother, then to restore the father, and then to restore God. What does it mean? The mother, on one level, it means this heart of religion. It means to come yourself to the level and heart that's longing for the coming of the Messiah, right? But also to head up the religion that's preparing for the coming of the Messiah. So that at the time of John, then, there's also this connection with Mary and then the birth of Jesus, and this is the culmination of the backstage view of history coming through Rebecca, Tamar and Mary. And out of that then Adam can come. Adam can be born. Messiah can be born. Because Mary's womb is separated from Satan. Satan has no claim over Jesus. And a very, very special situation. And of course, also Jesus is born not as a twin. Because of course something should already be resolved in this situation between Zachariah's family and Joseph and Mary and so on, and John the Baptist and Jesus and so on and so on and so on. And then Adam would have been able to really appear, testified to by this mother and son's cooperation, and no doubt should have taken place in the home of Zachariah with Mary, and the restoration of elder daughtership that should have taken place between Elizabeth and Mary. You can understand all this type of background more, right? So maybe we still don't know everything, but we start to see more what's going on in the background, and that should have happened. But Father understands he needs to walk this course also. Of course, fundamentally, this course ought to be walked by the people who are preparing for the coming of Adam. But when Father wasn't received, of course, Father had to walk this course himself. Jesus had to walk this course himself, right? Start off at the very bottom, no family, no foundation, no nothing. And win his discipleship and build things up again so he can stand in the position to find a wife and to get married. So that was Jesus' big struggle. How do I get a wife? How do I get married? My mother should have helped me. What does that mean? It means John the Baptist would have helped. It means this whole foundation would have been recovered somehow. But it didn't happen. So Jesus has to walk the course himself from servant to servant, to win the John the Baptist course himself and find a bride and be able to be recognized as the Messiah. This sort of content is in there. Anyhow, this also relates to our own course, and what does it mean? It means fundamentally this is the course whereby you restore elder sonship. This is the most difficult part of it in a sense. It means where you win spiritual children, or where you touch the hearts of other people and win their respect, so they will go with you to be reborn, or maybe you can say to get into the bone marrow of the Messiah along with you. So this is, you remember that diagram about the true family and the blessed family? And also we know we need our spiritual children. Father needed his spiritual children, right? To get blessed. He needed to engage 3 families before he could be blessed. And then our course as blessed families to find 6 spiritual children means, restoring 3 families in that sort of sense, or restoring Adam's family, Noah's family, this sort of meaning. So that's also our course as well. And Father had to rebuild that sort of foundation. So this is about Abel's position, how to win Cain, how to restore eldest sonship, and then how to make a condition for Messiah to be born, and then how to meet the Messiah, and how to support the Messiah to have a bride and be able to fulfill his mission. So this is a very important type of foundation, and a sort of heart and attitude. So what's the essence of the heart and attitude? So when you're treated as a servant of servants, when you come back, then what do? Of course, you get very upset and you chop all their heads off. That's what you do, isn't it? You get very angry. I'm here to help you. I've sacrificed my life for your sake, and you're treating me so badly. And how do you do that? And you abandon, you go back to God's house. But actually, God, you can't get in. maybe you can't get in, because actually you didn't. You lost your heart. You can't get back, because what took you out in the first place was you captured God's heart. Now you lost it along the way, like Mary lost it. Do you understand? And then you can't do it anymore. Can you understand how many parallels there are in this to Father's course, to Jesus' course, to our course? And what sort of attitude do we have to find this attitude that God has? We have to love the enemy. We have to want for our enemy even the things that we cannot have. We have to want, the labourers in the vineyard. There were some people there in the morning, right? Some of us were there, comparatively speaking, at the beginning of the day, right? The beginning of the True Parents course, and we were labouring and so on and so on and so on, and then some other guy comes along 30 years later and gets it all for nothing, and we want to kill him. Maybe not, but maybe at least we know he's not as worthy as I am. Someone else met such a dreadful, dreadful challenge along the way that although we sort of managed to find a way to keep going and not completely abandoned, they abandoned. But of course they shouldn't come back, because they didn't keep the standard that I kept. Do you know what I mean? You can know all these things. So how do we know? How do you know what your course is and what someone else's course is? How can you say? How can you say you would have done better than Hyojin? How can you say you would have done better than somebody else? Do you understand? If you were in the position that they found themselves in. So we have nothing to say about somebody else, really. That's the whole problem, isn't it? That's the Archangel and Adam, somebody else. But you don't know what somebody else has to do. You don't know what they have to face. So we have nothing to say about somebody else. We do not know. What we know is that God wants everybody. So prodigal son, elder son, he knows that he was there all the time. He knows he was doing the right stuff all the time. And that younger brother just spent it all. Prostitutes and parties. There's no way I'm going to welcome him home. There's no way. This is a dreadful, dreadful injustice. Do you understand? But God is not like that. And if we understand God's heart, then we wouldn't be like that either. So it applies on all sorts of different levels, right? Amongst us to people outside, outside people, Of course, they can't be as beloved as God as we are, can they? It's not possible. That's religious people's problem, isn't it? We're going to heaven, but those other guys, they go to the wrong church. They're not going. They're definitely not going. If we get there and that guy gets in and I don't, golly, I'm going to be complaining to God. It's like that, isn't it? So, we have all these things in ourselves because we're not like God. That's revealing that we're not like God. That's that elder son, right? He had the archangel's nature. But that's it's easy to say, to notice what he did wrong, but will I notice myself? How my heart and attitude wasn't right many times? Do I even know about that? Or do I think I'm just okay? What am I going to write on that new resolution page? Do you understand? Do I even know? Probably I did lots of things I don't even know what I did. I don't even know what I didn't do. But it would be good to find out, on the basis of this sort of reflection, to discover maybe some good moments, and you think, by golly, I didn't even half know what I was doing. but I somehow managed to do the right thing. Thank God for that. And maybe sometimes you did something that was I did something that was very insensitive to God or other people, or arrogant, or not the right heart, or So we need to learn about heart. This is all about heart, right? This is a passage of heart, and it's starting off from this lower place. So we became the children of the servant, right? That's the archangel. But when you go back into God's house, you're not even a servant. You're not accepted. You're a servant of a servant. It's that sort of a course, and that's the course of. That means you lose your life. You go to the place that's lowest of the lowest, lower than the lowest, in order to save the person who you might imagine is lower than you in a way, but that's the place to go to. That's the course that God went. So that's sort of meaning, and then so we need to apply it to. So how would you apply that? Who could you apply that to? You might apply that to your colleagues. You might apply that to your brothers and sisters in the movement. You might apply it to your husband. You might apply it to your wife. You might apply it in any situation where you have to be amazingly generous, where you have to forget about myself and my pain and my hurt and my sensibilities and my feelings and my sense of betrayal and my sense of being deceived and all the times that I was cheated. And you need to have the same attitude that I need to have. Anyhow, we know clearly Cain and Abel cannot be received by God unless they come together. They need to come together. In other words, this is to do with this one, right? A restoration of elder sonship, getting to there. And on that basis, parentship can be restored, and then kingship can be restored. And of course, this is not a one-off process, right? So this is servant of servant. This is the vertical course, right? But this vertical course is carried out through 8 horizontal stages. What does it mean? Maybe Tim Miller got some victories on the individual level, right? But then when my life moves on to the next level, what does it mean? I maybe got some victories. Maybe when I sat there in the matching, maybe for at least one split second, my heart wasn't too bad, right? It almost got to where it should be. And I said to God, I just, whatever you want, God, I don't have any opinion for myself. But then maybe that didn't seem to be enough when I got married, do you understand? You find yourself again in a place where you almost, you come to the bottom again, right? And then you have to build up again. So don't imagine that when you got to here as an individual, that when you move to the next level, you'll find yourself up there, because you won't. You'll be here. Right? So, we have that type of experience, right? We think we've done all right, and then we find ourselves in a situation which challenges us on a different level, right? So, you probably recognize this in your spiritual life, that there's times before you move to another level that were some of the most trying times, some of the most difficult things, where you proved to God you were trustworthy on another level, and you got another level of responsibility. I remember myself, I was, before I got, after I got matched, but I wasn't yet blessed, I was doing okay. I was doing quite well, really. Not doing bad at all. I was a leader, and I had a team of young members I was taking care of, and I got out of the office where not only was I doing the accounts, later on I got asked to do the general affairs instead of the archetypal general affairs man David Franklin. I got the general affairs job at one point, and I got out of that and I started doing what I really like to do, like teaching, and I really love to do that. And I was looking after a team of young people, and then I got called to go to another place and go up to actually Manchester and become there. I went to Manchester, Tricia remembers about that, to one of the groups of people that Father directed to do home church in Manchester. And I arrived there, and from being, doing pretty good, being pretty respected, being, the leader of this very lovely team of amazing young people. There was a Chinese and a Russian and a Japanese, and it was all humanity was in that team. It was just a remarkable little team. I was having such a rewarding experience that I went to Manchester, and I went from being respected in being up there, maybe maybe not there, but maybe at least, somewhere, not too bad on this course. And I find myself, I'm nobody, because don't belong to the nationality of people who are there. Do you understand? I'm an English person. None of them are English. And they've all come very sacrificially from another country to serve the providence. Because when Father brought the big crusade team here in '78, he brought them all to London. But then all of our European members and Central and our European leadership, they found it very difficult to unite with Father, to unite with the Korean early disciples of Father, and to unite with each other. And Father sent them all out instead to go and work nation by nation. So I arrived, it was like arriving in my own nation in another nation. It wasn't my nation, so I didn't have any credibility. I didn't have any position. I was nobody. I was sent as somebody. I thought I was somebody. I saw I was coming to take over. That was the plan. Father said, you send the British people there, and when the people from that nation have witnessed to as many people as they are, they'll go back to their nation, and the person who comes will take over. So I went to take over, but I found I was a servant of servants, and I was an outsider. I wasn't anybody, and then it was a really difficult situation to come into, and asked many things which were very not like really fair almost, but even not right. But how do you find the right heart? How do you find the right attitude? How do you do it the right way? And it got to such a difficult circumstance in the end. I mean, this was really desperate. I finally went to the 36 couple Korean brother, and I explained to him, there's something going on there which isn't quite right, and it needs some attention. And I went with one brother from that nationality. We went together. And I was so shocked, because he told me, you have to look to yourself and see what you're doing. Are you really doing what you should be doing? Don't complain about them. And he sent me back, for God's sake. And I'd already identified myself as the enemy. But actually I went back and they didn't do anything to me, really. But this brother who went with me was one of them. He was the traitor. Do you understand? So that was really, really difficult. And then, I think a month or two later, the whole situation changed. And Father's direction changed the whole circumstance again, and everybody came back together again. We weren't in national groupings anymore. I went to Birmingham, and I became the centre leader in Birmingham. Through the course of that, I came to the point where I felt like, several times I felt, I am definitely getting out of this. Because this is not God, this is not the principle, this is not heaven, this is not love, this is not the way it's meant to be, and I am really struggling and I don't like it, and why the heck should I stay here? And what I realised was, if I give up, what happens to God? That's the point. The point is not whether I'm enjoying it or not, the point is if I give up, what happens to God? And I realised God will lose everything. Because God always needs someone who's learned, who's gained, who's grown through the difficulty. Because where's the difficulty coming from? It's coming from all our fallen natures, do you understand? All our misunderstandings, all our distance from God, which is mine too. And so fortunately I understood and I continued. And then I got a bigger responsibility. I became never became the person who inherited the foundation in Manchester and took over all those young members, but I became that person in another city. Right? And that was through. So in other words, I went some sort of course, on a new level. Do you understand what I mean? Mm. And then you have these things too. If you examine your life, you have them too. And another occasion, maybe I won't. I'm going to take too long. I think if I do all of that. So. But that's just one example, right? But we have such important moments. And what's the key? It's through that course you separate yourself from Satan. The key is what we emphasized right at the beginning. God's attitude, Jesus' attitude, Father's attitude, the saints' attitude. You're not doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it for God and other people. And it's when you do for God and other people at cost to yourself that you separate yourself from Satan, right? And God can trust you with a new level of responsibility. So we're all challenging that because we all know we're supposed to be tribal messiahs, right? So where's Tim Miller's 430 couples? I don't have it. I don't have it. And where's everything I should have? I'm a national messiah as well at one point. I didn't do a lot there, but I am. I did some things, but not enough at all. But anyhow, God is always creating new plans and new ways and new situations, and surely Foundation Day will be quite an extraordinary new beginning. As I said, it will not all be manifest instantaneously. The world will not end and begin in some sort of dramatic fashion, because as Father says, when we move from evening to night or night to morning, in a sense there's a moment when it happens, when the night ends and the morning begins, or the day ends and the night begins. But actually you can't identify the moment so clearly. You only really know afterwards, looking back. You can't identify the moment. So this Foundation Day is the most significant moment in all of human history, because of true parents' fulfillment of responsibility. But actually, if you don't know the providence, if you don't understand Father's words, you'll never know. And unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, it's not blindingly obvious. Fundamentally because Father wasn't received. And all the things that Father made ready were not all responded to properly. It's been very difficult. We'll see that as we go to look at Father's life. So can you catch this type of idea?
Yeah.
So this is really in all our lives. So don't be surprised when you find yourself at the bottom again with nothing, because that's a good sign, right? It means you moved to another level, right? It's a good sign, optimistic sign. But you have to be able to read what's going on. I will tell you shortly about one other thing that I experienced, and that was I got to be. I went on. Father called Korean elders to become national messiahs in 1996, and he called these old men and women who were 36 couples and 72 couples and so on to go out again to the world and to begin again, in a sense. And people like Reverend Wonpil Kim came to Norway, and Reverend Youngwee Kim and his wife came here to Britain, and we were so impressed because they were by that time in their 70s, and it wasn't easy to go out again and begin again. And then lo and behold, after they did that, and then actually Father asked Japanese and able nations and Cain nations to do it. And I remember making that announcement. I was very briefly the national leader here in Britain, and the announcement came at that time. It was our wedding anniversary. It was our blessing anniversary, July the 1st. I was at the Holy Tree in the park, and I had to tell everybody that this direction came, that we now had to do the same thing. We had to be ready to go anywhere in the world and be ready to offer our lives for that nation. And of course it was a very tricky situation, because surely I was supposed to set the example, right? But maybe I didn't really want to do that, but I didn't have much way out of it. So I had to do that, but of course I had to persuade my wife first, and somehow we agreed. And we offered to do that, and I was in the National Messiah's workshop in Chompion, a 40-day workshop to prepare. And there I was, praying really hard, God, where will you go? And as I went through the workshop, and I got some opportunities to teach and speak, and I'd been a workshop lecturer, and I was the national leader before, and I'm okay at doing that sort of stuff, and I start to feel, I should be sent to this Christian nation where I'll be able to teach everybody and help them to understand the divine principle and transform themselves. And then we went, Reverend Quark came, and we went to the lottery, and it was one of these lotteries on the board, you follow these lines, this. And then I got this nation. I didn't even know what this nation was. I never heard of it. And this wasn't some vast Christian kingdom with millions of population where I would preach and tell them about the divine principle. This was the only Buddhist kingdom in the world, in the Himalaya mountains that I never even heard of. And I had to go to some brother who had a satellite laptop to get some description of this little country that I never heard of. So that was a big shock. I felt I didn't do as well then as I did in my matching, because I was open to anything then, and I had the wrong idea. I had to change my mind very quickly. And then I couldn't go there. I did go there, but it's very difficult to go there because basically you can't enter and you can't get visas, and it's very difficult. I went there for 4 days and had an amazing experience. But anyhow, I couldn't go there, so I went to India instead, just to help for a couple of months, to help in 1998 to expand the blessing to the millions of people that Father was asking us to expand the blessing to. And India's got 1 billion people, so it's a good place to do it. And we were doing all these crazy, amazing things to fulfill these conditions for Father. Do you remember? At that time, those of you around in the 1990s, we were doing all these conditions, 160 couples, 180 couples, and then, for our own tribes, and then, holy wine in the Ganges, or whatever it was. Those sorts of things we were doing there. And I got asked to take care of the whole Providence in India. The Continental Director said, you're the United Nations force that has come to help, because very, very successful couple, some of you might know them, the McLachlan couple, David and Emily McLachlan, they'd been doing great work in India, but they'd gone to Bahrain and everything wasn't working so well. So I got asked, so I had to ask my wife, is it okay if I do more, I stay more, because of course she was left behind with the kids. And she agreed, and we reorganized our whole life, and we sold everything we had and put every tiny piece of money we had, and we relocated our whole life out of London and bought a house, because otherwise we couldn't afford to do it. And in the process, my dad, miraculously, my dad's really fallen Adam. His wife left him, along with his 2 sons, and he was left behind all by himself. And they divorced one another, and his course was very lonely and very difficult. But many years after that, I went to him and asked his help, and he helped me to buy that house. And I went back to India, having reorganized my whole life. And 2 weeks after I got there, they said, well, actually, sorry, Tim, we don't really need you after all. And that was a little bit of a shock, right? Because I just reorganized my whole life. And then they didn't need me anymore. I came back and I didn't have any money, I didn't have anything. I had a house, but I didn't have anything. And I couldn't get a job. And I was out with my roses and my candles at 48 or 49 or whatever it was, and it felt like really 7 of sevens. And inside me, I could see there was the potential to have great resentment. Do you understand? Great resentment. But I realized this is it again. You've gone down to the bottom. And what does that mean? That means you've got to keep your attitude. And then after that, I got a different sort of mission sometime after that to do with the European providence. So can you understand this type of these types of trials, right? But of course, that's nothing. That's nothing. That's nothing compared with people who've had much more central positions in God's providence in preparation for the Messiah, or in the providence under the true parents. What do we know about what the true family had been through? What do we know about what those early disciples went through? We know nothing in comparison with that. What do we know about smiling, Won Pil Kim with all his beautiful teachings and what he passed through having to attend the true parents' very time? We don't know almost nothing about it, do we know, really, in comparison. But the formula remains the same, artistically. So this is Providence of Restoration sent on the Lord of the Second Advent. So I hadn't taught this for ages, and actually I didn't find the notes and bring them with me. So I'm going to go over the slides, and tonight I'm going to try and work on it a bit more and prepare it a bit more. But I think this is very insightful. As I looked at it again, I thought this is really helpful, because somehow you may wonder sometimes, why are we not in heaven? Because when you gave up your fishing net to join, and you left the university, or you did whatever you did, and you abandoned everything to follow the Messiah, your expectation was by whenever it was going to be, 1981 or 1992 or whenever it was going to be, that, maybe your mum didn't come along and say, can one of my sons sit on the left hand and the other on the right when the Messiah gets on his throne, but you were expecting something that maybe hasn't quite turned out that way. So I think it's very insightful to see how Father was working so hard to create all the incredible opportunities, using his understanding of the providence to do it. And to see all the things that God had remarkably prepared. So this is about the providence of restoration prepared by God for the Lord of the Second Advent. So of course, World War I was the formation stage foundation for the Messiah on a worldwide level. We know that, right, from our study of the divine principle. So in 1920, the Messiah could come and be born. And, a very, very special situation. As I mentioned, Adam, Jesus, and the Lord of the Second Advent, they're not the same as any other man, any other human being, because they're directly from the lineage. They're the begotten sons of God. So their status is completely different. God indwells within them. They don't have to, God doesn't, they don't hear God as words. They don't, we're trying to study the Word together today, right? From Father's words. Because none of this teaching is, Reverend Sudo's teaching who taught it, or Reverend Yu's teaching. This is all Father's teaching. So we're listening to the words, but, difficult to catch the words, really. But Adam or Jesus or Father, they didn't have to, not through the words, but they had an indwelling of God. So the Lord of the Second Advent has to be born someplace. So where was he born? God prepared Korea as the chosen nation. And he was born in 1920 in Korea. But Satan was, of course, aware of God's providence. So Satan used Japan to obstruct God's providence. So Japan occupied Korea from 1905 until 1945 and took the sovereignty of the people and the land. And this was the 40 years miserable course, which of course became had to be overcome in some way for Father to be born in 1920, and also for Father to begin his mission in 1945. And of course that connects to the Second World War, we're going to look in a moment, and that connects, for example, to this national foundation through the liberation movement of 1919, which we talked about before. So here we go. For the Lord of the Second Advent to be born, a condition must be made to recover the nation, or to recover the sovereignty. So on March the 1st, 1919, the independence movement made that sort of condition. Externally, the patriotic movement of resistance to the Japanese. Internally, to restore the land where the Lord of the Second Advent will be born. So it looked like it was just seeking self-determination for Korea. But actually, it was making the final preparations so the Lord could be born on the national level. And Yu Guan-sun in Chonan, 100 kilometers south of Seoul, was the symbol of the resistance movement. She was arrested because of her going around all sorts of different places and leading this protest. She was arrested, imprisoned and tortured, and her body was cut into 6 pieces. This was a foundation of blood and sacrifice which Satan couldn't deny. In other words, this is the sort of level of love that cannot be objected to. And this on a national level created the conditions. The people made it. Of course, she made it. And she, who is she? She's Rebecca Tamar Mary. Do you understand? That's who she is. She's inheriting the spirit of Rebecca Tamar and Mary. She's the virgin. She's the young woman who's so courageous and so brave. And what she thinks is she's doing this one, right? But actually she's doing this one. And she isn't alone. She's followed by many, many, many Korean people who endanger their lives peacefully and are beaten up and are arrested and tortured and killed as a result of it. So a foundation of blood and sacrifice which Satan had to approve. So 6 January 1920, Father's born. But before the Lord of the Second Advent can start his mission, Satan's dominion over Korea must be rooted out. So Father couldn't start until really self-determination is there. Again, we don't know, but presumably, things should already have been different, right? I don't know. Father said sometimes that Adam nation is Korea, original Eve nation is where? Britain. So even Father implied that he should be married to
the Queen,
to someone from the royal family. He implied that, right? But how's that possible? I mean, that's complete nonsense, isn't it? Because how can someone from Korea, the back of nowhere, ever that happen to them? But you can imagine maybe had Korea had its self-determination, maybe that's a possibility. Or you can imagine maybe, Korea shouldn't be under the Japanese anyhow. So it'd be maybe British colony or something else. You know, Father made this place in this little island called Gomun Island, Gomun-do. He made the ocean palace, the ocean Chonjonggung. He made there. Gomun-do was the place the British Navy was stationed, protecting Korea from the Russians. So there are all sorts of things that we don't know, even now, behind the scenes that we're preparing a very, very different type of outcome. Anyhow, unfortunately, Korea didn't have its self-determination, and it took the end of the Second World War and the defeat of the Japanese for Korea to receive its liberation. This was the growth stage foundation for the Messiah on the worldwide level. So the victory of the Allied nations over the Satan's side, Cain-type nations. 15th of August 1945, Japan surrendered and the Pacific War was over. The last nation to surrender. So Korea was liberated after 40 years of Japanese domination. Of course, this was a very, very dramatic moment. You know, the Americans were fighting right through the Pacific, taking everything island by island. And then, it was very, very clear there was no way the Japanese were just going to surrender. And it came to this very, very difficult point of decision, which was what? What was the final decision during the war? It was the atom bomb. Mamma mia. So, they dropped that bomb on these cities which are more Christian population, interestingly. And that was such a terrible, terrible moment. But if surrender had been delayed, the Japanese had a plan to kill 100,000 to 200,000 Korean Christians. So they already, when they arrested Father after he came back from study in Japan, and they were questioning him to try and get the names of the network of underground liberation people, they wanted to basically kill them all. Right? Most of them were Christians, so that was their plan. But that was one reason why this shouldn't be delayed. So probably Satan would have killed all the prepared people. The Israel monastery, the Inside Belly Church, all these people would have been killed. And this was the starting point of the actual providence, the actual mission of True Father, Lord of the Second Advent. So the internal foundation, of course, is to do with Christian history. What's Christianity? Christianity is the second Israel. It's standing in the position that Judaism originally stood in. It's standing in the position of the bride religion, to prepare the foundation for the Messiah to be born, and to prepare a bride for the Messiah. The external foundation is the victorious able nations after the end of the Second World War. That's Britain in the Eve position, mother and son's cooperation here. USA in the able position, France in the Cain position. So internal foundation Christianity, external foundation victorious able nations. So of course this is a very significant moment. So fundamentally, clearly of course these are Christian nations, right? So this is the highest point of Christian civilization or global influence, global dominion. So in terms of the internal foundation, there's a lot of content here. I don't even remember the whole content, but it's probably just as well because I want to give you an impression. So don't get buried in the detail, right? Because there's so much detail here. Don't get buried in the detail so that you can't catch it. What I want to show you is God prepared so much. The providence should be in a different place today than it is. And Father believed it every step of the way, totally. How can we believe today that 7 years from 1945, Father would be recognized in Korea as the Messiah, centering on Korean Christianity? Through Korean Christianity, he would be connected to American Christianity. Through the American government, he would be connected to the United Nations, and he would become the center of global peace building and the coming of the kingdom. 1952, some very significant foundation. So Father can absolutely stand in a global influential position. That's what God had planned, right? So you've got Korean Christianity, it's like Judaism, right? Korea, like Israel. So this is the internal religious foundation, this is the nation. Korea, of course, very much connected to the United States. The United States liberated Korea. Unfortunately, of course, Korea was not just liberated by the United States, but also the Russians, who declared war on Japan days before the end of the war. They took North Korea, right? They invaded. Just as in Europe they came over and took Eastern Europe, they declared war on the Japanese just before the end of the war, and they took northern part of Korea. But of course what's supposed to happen is something other than what happens. But anyhow, from Korean Christianity to Korean government, which was first South Korean government, of course, dominated by Korean Christians, with Syngman Rhee, who actually interestingly married an Austrian woman, right? So first lady of South Korea, European lady, Christian lady. Syngman Rhee, one of those Korean Christians who was exiled and spent his time in America. Very, very strong connection going on to America. And all the missionaries from America to Korea. And that sort of foundation. And from that foundation, United States to the United Nations. The United Nations formed after the Second World War as the counterpart or the vehicle for the Lord of the Second Advent to restore the world. It should be dominated by the successful, victorious Christian democratic nations. And then Father talked in the Christian side about these different groups within Korean Christianity. There's the Able type group. They refused to cooperate with the Japanese. They didn't bow at the Shinto shrines. They wouldn't collaborate. And then you've got the Cain type Christians who worshipped at the Shinto shrines, which meant that they were, in a position of collaboration, and of course they weren't risking their lives. And then you've got the spiritual groups. So the national level mainline Christian groups, from 1919, in Father's autobiography he talks about his great uncle, who was a signatory to this declaration seeking independence. But he removed his name because there were too many people from his church who signed the document. He backed off, right? But he was a very, very significant figure. And he gave the whole family fortune, remember, to the liberation movement. And overnight they became in a financially difficult position. And you remember Father saying he was under the bed covers at home when his uncle came to visit. And his uncle had been very badly tortured and mistreated by the Japanese. But he continued to be such a brave man for Providence. All this background's there, right? He was very connected into the people who set up, finally, the South Korean government. Of course, it should have been all of Korea's government, not just the South. But Father talks about how they sent a helicopter to get him at the time when they were setting up the constitution for the future of South Korea. But actually he didn't accept that. And also Father explains about his own position, because when he was in Japan, Father was very involved in the liberation movement. He had lots of Christian student friends. Of course, these were the elite Koreans, right? The really clever ones who got to study in Japan. And he had connections to many Christian students, but also had a connection to many communist students, because they were also very involved in the liberation movement. And Father talks about taking money from Japan to the Korean government in exile, and I've forgotten his name, but this very significant, most famous leader of the Korean government in exile, right? So he had a direct connection there as well. So Father had direct connections. So to this external foundation, it was going to make the government, the Liberal Party, set up a constitutional committee. But actually it didn't, Father wasn't received, Father's uncle wasn't received, great uncle. And then there's the tribal level Christian foundation. This was connected to the groups like the Israel Monastery group, which was very well politically connected. And then you've got the tribal level spiritual Christian groups. Also that foundation, this is, and the Father also explained many other details which I can't talk about now. But amongst those groups, the Israel Monastery, Kim Baek-moon, and also later on, of course, the Inside Belly Church. So this group was very connected, as I said, to the future South Korean government. Father was at the Israel Monastery from October 45, just after the war, till April 46. And as you know, Mr. Kim Baek-moon, he got this revelation to have this special ceremony with Father, where he anointed him with the anointing given to King Solomon. But somehow there was some tensions and difficulties, and Kim Baek-moon was feeling very difficult, and Father in the end left, couldn't stay there. So that was obviously a very significant moment. And as I said, Kim Baek-moon's group, there were many women who were married to the future government of South Korea. So this didn't work out as it was supposed to have done. Christmas 45, he had a revelation about doing that with Father. So this was somehow the male group, Father explained. And Father then, of course, went north in June of 1946. That's when he left his wife behind and his little baby behind, this little boy, Sungjin, who was 40 days old. He went out to buy rice, he got the command from God. He couldn't go back to tell his wife, because if he had, he was fearful he wouldn't have done it. So he crossed the border and he went and he started preaching. Father was imprisoned, that time, and very severely tortured. When he was severely tortured and thrown out of the prison, this was connected to the Inside Belly Church, right? Because they were in the prison the same time he was in the prison, right? You know that story. And Mrs. Ho Ho Bin, she even had the revelation, like the Korean folk tale, a revelation that she would meet the Lord, like this folk tale about fidelity. You know this folk tale about fidelity, when this Korean young woman is engaged to this young man who goes away to get the training as the high civil servant, and whilst he's away, the ruler tries to take that girl, and she refuses to be taken. And then the official comes back to actually inspect the country and see what's going on, because he's like from the top government to inspect how the local governor's doing, and he comes back dressed as a beggar. And he visited his fiancée in the prison, and he looks like a beggar. And she's tried to be taken by the governor, right? What does this remind you of, right? Sarah, Abraham, Pharaoh. That content, same contents. He arrives back and she welcomes him as her husband, even though he's like a beggar. And Mrs. Bin, also got that she would meet the Lord in such a way. So Father passes message to her 3 times that she should renounce publicly, before the authorities, the Japanese authorities, she doesn't believe her revelations, and she should be released, but she can't do it. And finally he writes it on the piece of paper with the fishbone and the suit, and then this is found, and he's terribly, terribly, terribly tortured to death, fundamentally. But they don't want him to die in the prison, because he's never had a trial. So they throw him out in the snow as a dead man. But he's discovered and they save his life, and Father begins again. That content. That's to do with this church. This was Father reaching out to them. So she rejected Father's message, and then Father's tortured. And then Father also had other providences to other significant people. And he goes this servant of servant course with this very extraordinary lady who had the revelation that she's the wife of God. And she had so many profound experiences with God as God's wife. She felt truly, truly she's God's wife. And Father came to her family and served her, and servant of servants. And then he climbs up in her affection, until finally she's treating him like her son. But then finally, as she gets to the position to be like the son, he goes above her position, and she stops getting her revelations, like John the Baptist right in Jesus. This type of same phenomenon. And then she accuses Father of taking God away from her, and taking the voice of God away from her, and throws him out fundamentally. That sort of content. So these groups failed. And through their failure, it meant there wasn't the connection to Korean Christianity. And this lost 2,000 years of Christian history and 4,000 years including Jewish history. And Father was just in the darkness. What does that mean finally? It means that Father, in the end, of course, all the betrayal, all the accusation that came to him that time, and the next time when he was sentenced to 5 years in Hungnam, they came from Christians, of course. And they accused him. So this is the internal providence centering on Judaism and then Christianity. God had prepared a foundation of 4,000 years, but it got lost. And then there's another providence going on the external level. And this is to do with the restoration of the 3 rights on the worldwide level, centering on the able camp. So I'll just show you this very shortly. So you know this content. This is the situation of the Second World War, right? Here's the able camp, Mother and Sons Corporation, Britain, United States, France. And here's Satan's camp, Cain side, Japan, Germany, Italy. And and the principle explains fundamentally anti-Christian. Mother and Sons Corporation, Christian victory, peak of the 2,000 years of Christian history, because Christianity has overcome Satan's side and is in the position of global dominance. This is the global level Mother and Sons Corporation to restore the mother, so the Father or the Messiah can come, and ultimately, humanity can receive the Messiah and kingship can be restored. So you can maybe understand how that could have gone speedily if all those potentials and foundations had been fulfilled. And of course that depended on also what was going on with Korean Christianity. And Father also explained about United States, Britain and France united Christianity through particularly the relationship between Protestantism and Catholicism. And Father understood there would be a 7-year course, and then after the 7-year course would be the beginning of the Chunulgu, the beginning of the Kingdom of Heaven. And Father was making his way through that period from Korea towards the United States and towards the United Nations. The United Nations should have been completely governed and controlled by the Christian nations. But actually, of course, unfortunately, it became governed by, or influenced by, or divided, or invaded, because the Christian nations allowed the communist nations in, particularly to begin with the Soviet Union. And that meant that actually so many things were blocked and couldn't be done for God through the United Nations. So you can catch the flavour of how much God had prepared and how much God had made ready. So tomorrow we'll carry on with that and get some more understanding of those sorts of points. Thank you for your very good attention. I'll just say a closing prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, pray really that this can be a very grace-filled time. Everybody's making a lot of effort to be here, and they really feel it's important, and that's why they're here, and they want to meet you. So please, through this explanation that originally comes from our true parents and from our true Father who came to bring the Word, please allow us, Heavenly Father, to catch your heart, to catch the amazing heart of our true parents, their absolute determination to liberate you at the risk of their lives, and how many times you prepared and you opened the way and you sought to actually find a way to meet a response from human beings which would allow your kingdom to come. I really hope that in the course of tomorrow especially we can explore that more and see how strongly you were at work, and how many things and many times the providence should have developed so rapidly, so that actually Foundation Day could have come in an even more incredible, sooner, quicker of course, 1952 even, but in such a powerful way to really transform the world. Dearest Heavenly Father, our Father has kept hope and given you hope and consoled you in moments of bitter, bitter betrayal and disappointment. Always also giving us hope and encouraging us to keep going and giving. And sometimes we felt bereft and we felt that all we'd done had come to very little. But we have to understand how much more you've experienced that, Heavenly Father, how much more true parents have experienced that, and understand what a privilege it's been these last many years to walk with you and to walk with the true parents through this difficult course, and to pay some of the price ourselves and go through some of the difficulties ourselves, and how that's not our burden, not the reason that Satan can enter our hearts, but rather it's our honour and it's our pride. And it's because of that that Father and Mother are offering such a generous amnesty and forgiveness and grace, which of course they're giving to us as the blessed central families, but surely they do not wish it to remain with us. We are in the able position to all the other people who we really want to reach out to and allow them to understand this incredible explanation of the divine principle, this incredible grace of true parents' victory, and that the place to be reborn has finally come into being through Foundation Day. Thank you for everything, Heavenly Father. Please uplift our hearts and minds and help us to meet Foundation Day really, really well. Not just as ourselves, but on behalf of our people, our tribe, our nation, our city, and so on. I want to offer this prayer now and report in the name of all present here, in my name, Tim and Sabina Miller, the Blessed Central Family. Adieu. Adieu. One more round of applause.
Thank you, Tim, for making it relevant to our life and to our day-to-day reality. Thank you all, and if you're travelling, please have a cup of coffee if you like before you go. And if you're coming back tomorrow morning, if you could try to be here for 8:30, 8:45, so we can make a good start again together. Yeah. And if anybody has forms still to hand in for the holy wine or the application for the blessing,